Good morning, everybody. This is Matt, and I'm going to do a late reading of the Federalist Papers, number 47. 47. I know could have done this after Friday, Friday, which I think was um, calendar. First of August today, so 27 week I did one early, so the 29th. The 29th. Friday, the month of July. So this for the month of July, even though it is August 1st. I'm going to do number 47 of James Madison. A review of the general form of the proposed government and the general mass of power allotted to it. I, James Madison, proceed to examine the particular structure of this government and the distribution of its power among its constituent parts. One of the principal objections inculcated by the more respectable adversaries to the Constitution is supposed violation of the political maxim that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments ought to be separate and distinct. In the structure of the federal government, no regard, it is said, seems to have been paid to this essential precaution in favor of liberty. The several departments of power are distributed and blended in, not in such a manner as at once to destroy all symmetry and beauty of form and to expose some of the essential parts of the edifice, danger of being crushed by the disproportionate weight of other parts. No political truth is certainly of greater intrinsic value, or it stamps to the authority of more enlightened people of liberty than that on which the objection is founded. The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elected, must justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. Were the federal constitution therefore really targeted to the accumulation of power over the mixture of powers, having the dangerous tendency to such an accumulation, no further arguments would be necessary to inspire a universal reprobation of the system. I persuade myself, however, it would be made apparent to everyone that the charge will not be supported and that the maximum hopes of it relax has been totally misconceived and misapplied. In order to form correct ideas on this important subject, it will be proper to investigate the sense in which the preservation of liberty requires that three great departments of power to be separate and distinct. The oracle who is always consulted and cited on the subject is the celebrated Montesquieu. If he be not the author of this invaluable precept in science and politics, he has the merit at least of displaying and recommending it most effective in the attention of the public. Let us endeavor in the first place to ascertain his meaning of this one. The British Constitution was Montesquieu, while Homer has been to the didactic writers of the as the latter have considered the work of the immortal Bard, a perfect model for which the principles and rules of the ethic are to be taught, and by which all similar works will be judged. So this Montesquieu, great political critic, appears to have viewed as or to use his own expression, as a mirror of political liberty, and to have delivered in the form of elementary truths the several characteristic principles of that particular system, that we may be sure that not to mistake his meaning in this case. Let us recur to the source from which the maxim is drawn. On the slightest view of the British Constitution, we must perceive that the legislative, executive, and judiciary departments are by no means totally separate from each other. The executive magistrate forms an integral part of the legislative authority. He alone has the prerogative of making treaties with foreign sovereigns, which, when made, have, under certain limitations, the force of legislative acts. All the members of the judiciary department are appointed by him, can be removed by him on the address of the two houses of parliament, and formed, when he pleases, to consult one of his constitutional powers. One branch of the legislative department forms also a great constitutional council. The executive chief, as on the other hand, is the sole depository of judicial power in cases of impeachment, and is invested with the supreme appellate jurisdiction in all other cases. The judges, again, are so far connected with the legislative department as often to attend and participate in its deliberations, but not admitted to a legislative vote. From these facts, by which Montesquieu was backed, it may clearly be inferred that in saying there can be no limit when the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or body of magistrates, or if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and executive. He did not mean that these departments ought to have no partial agency in or no control of the acts of each other. His meaning, as his own words import, and still more conclusively is illustrated by the example in his eye, can amount to no more than this, where the whole power of one department is exercised by the same hands, which possess the whole power of another department. The fundamental principle of the free constitution are secure. This would have been the case in the Constitution examined by him, who was the sole executive magistrate, that possessed also the complete legislative power, or the supreme administration of justice, or the entire legislative body that possessed the supreme judiciary, or the supreme executive authority. This, however, is not among the vices of the magistrate in whom the whole executive power resides cannot of himself make the law, though he can put a negative on the case, nor administer justice in person, though he has the appointment of those who refuse it. The judges can exercise no political prerogative, though they have suits in the executive power, nor any legislative function, though they may be advised by the legislative council. The entire legislature can perform no judiciary act, though by the joint act of two of its branches the judges may be removed from their offices, and though one of its branches is possessed with the judicial power in the last resort, the entire legislature again can exercise no executive prerogative, though one of its branches constitutes supreme executive magistracy, and another on the impeachment of a court, and try and condemn all the subordinate officers in the executive department. The reasons on which Montesquieu grounds his maxim are a perfect demonstration of his meaning. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person, there can be no liberty, because apprehensions may arise lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. Again, were the power of judging joined with the legislative body, liberty of the subject would be exposed in public control. The judge would then be the legislator. Were it joined to the executive power, the judge might behave with all the violence of an oppressor. Some of these reasons are more fully explained in other passages, but briefly stated as they are here, is sufficiently established the meaning which we have put on the celebrated maxim of the celebrated author. If we look into the constitutions of the several states, we find that, notwithstanding the emphatical and in some instances unqualified terms in which this axiom has been laid down. There is not a single instance in which the several departments of power have been kept absolutely separate and distinct. New Hampshire, whose constitution was last formed, seems to have been fully aware of the impossibility and inexpediency of avoiding any mixture whatsoever of these departments, and has qualified the doctrine by declaring that the legislative, executive, and judiciary powers ought to be kept as separate from, and independent of each other as the nature of a free government will admit, or as is consistent with that chain of connection that binds the whole fabric of the Constitution, in one indissoluble bond with unity and amity. Our Constitution accordingly permits us these departments in several respects. The Senate, which is a branch of the legislative department, is also a judicial tribunal for the trial of impeachments. The President, who is the head of the executive department, is a presiding member of the Senate, also of the Senate, and besides an equal vote in all cases, has a casting vote in case of a tie. The executive head is himself eventually elected every year by the legislative department. The executive head is himself eventually elected every year by the legislative department. His council is every year chosen by appointed members of the same department. Servants, officers of state are also appointed by the legislature, and the members of the judicial department are appointed by the executive. Oh, that's why I just for the state. Oh, okay. New Hampshire. Okay. I think we still talking about New Hampshire. The Constitution of Massachusetts has observed a sufficient, though less pointed caution, an expression in the fundamental article of liberty. It declares that the legislative department shall never exercise the executive and judicial powers, or either of them. The executive shall never exercise the legislative and judicial powers, or either of them. The judicial shall never exercise the legislative and executive powers, or either. And okay, so this declaration corresponds precisely with the doctrine of Montesquieu, as has been explained, and is not in a single point by the convention. It goes no farther than to prohibit anyone in the entire department from exercising the powers of another department. In the very Constitution to which it prefixed, a partial mixture of powers has been determined. The executive magistrate expresses a qualified negative on the legislative body in the Senate, which is a part of the legislature, is a court of impeachment for members of the executive and judiciary departments. The members of the judiciary department are appointable by the executive department and removable by the Senate from the address of the two legislative branches. Lastly, a number of the officers of government are annually appointed by the department. As the appointment to officers, particularly executive officers, is in its nature an executive function, the compilers of the Constitution have. Last appointment is highly with the view established. I pass over the constitutions of Rhode Island and Connecticut, as they were formed prior to the Revolution, and even before the principle of the of political activity. The Constitution of New York contains some declaration on this subject, but it is very clear to have been framed from an eye to the danger of improperly blending the different departments. It gives, nevertheless, to the executive magistrate a partial control over the legislative department, and what is more, it gives a like control to the judicial department and even blends the executive and judiciary departments to exercise of this control. In its council of appointment, members of the legislative are associated with the executive authority in the appointment of officers of the executive and judiciary. Two, in its council's appointment members of appointment. Members of the legislative are associated with the executive and the appointment of officers, both executive and judiciary. And its court, for the power of impeachment and correction of errors, is to consist of one branch of the legislature, principal members of the judiciary. The Constitution of New Jersey was blended with different powers of government more than any of the preceding. The governor, who is in the executive magistrate, appointed by the legislature, is actually an ordinary, but surety of the state, and is a member of the Supreme Court of Appeal. And present, with casting vote of one of the legislative branches. The same legislative branch acts again as executive council of the governor, and with him constitutes the Court of Appeal. The members of the judiciary department are appointed by the legislative department and removable by one branch of it on the impeachment. According to the Constitution of Pennsylvania, the president, who is the head of the executive department, is annually elected by a vote in which the legislative department predominates. In conjunction with an executive council, he appoints the members of the judiciary department and forms a court of impeachment for trial of all officers, judiciary as well as executive. The judges of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and justices of the peace seem also to be removed by the legislature. And the executive power of pardoning in certain cases is referred to the same department. The members of the executive council are made ex officio justices of peace throughout the state. In Delaware, the chief executive magistrate is annually elected by the department. Speakers of the two legislative branches are vice presidents in the executive department. The executive chief, with six others appointed, three by each of the legislative branches, constitutes the Supreme Court of Appeals. He is joined with the legislative department in the appointment of other judges. Throughout the states, it appears that the members of the legislature may at the same time be justices of the peace and the court. Members of one branch of it are ex officio justices of the and are also the members of the executive council. Principal officers of the executive department are appointed by the legislature in one branch. The latter forms a court of impeachment. All officers may be removed on address of the legislature. Maryland has adopted a maxim in the most unqualified terms, declaring that legislative, executive, and judicial powers of government ought to be forever separate and distinct from each other. Her Constitution, notwithstanding, makes the executive magistrate appointable by the legislative department and the members of the judiciary by the executive. The language of Virginia is still more poignant on this subject. Her Constitution declares that the legislative, executive, and judicial departments shall be separate and distinct, so that neither exercises the powers properly belonging to the other, nor shall any person exercise the powers of more than one of them at the same time, except that justices of county courts shall be eligible to add a possible sentence. Yet we find not only this express exception, but the members of this inferior bodies, but that the chief magistrate with his executive council by the legislature that two members of the matter are triannually disclosed at the pleasure of the legislature, and that all the principal officers of the executive and judiciary are filled by the same department. The executive prerogative of pardon also is in case vested in the legislative department. The Constitution of North Carolina, which declares that the legislative, executive, and supreme judicial powers ought to be forever separate and distinct from each other, refers at the same time to the legislative department not only but all of the principal officers within both that and the Judiciary Department. In South Carolina, this Constitution accepted legislature eligible by the legislative department of the city line. Also, the appointment of members of the department including even justices of the peace and appointments of officers in the executive department, down to captains in the army and navy. In the Constitution of Georgia, there is a declared that the legislative, executive, and judicial departments are separate and distinct, so that neither exercise the power properly. We find the executive department is to be filled by appointments of the legislature, and the executive prerogative of party for the same authority. Even justices of the peace are to be appointed by the legislature. Inside in these cases in which the legislative, executive, and judicial departments have not been totally separate states, I wish not to be regarded as an advocate of the organization of the several state governments. I am fully aware that among the many excellent principles which they exemplify, they carry strong marks of evidence, and still stronger in the inexperience under which they are from. It is but too obvious that in some instances the fundamental principle under consideration has been violated by cheaper and mixture, and even an actual consolidation of the different powers. That in the instance of provision, that has a complete provision of it is but too obvious that in some instances the fundamental principle under consideration has been violated by too great a mixture, and even an actual consolidation of different powers, and that in no instance has a component provision been made for maintaining in practice the separation between. What I have wished to evince is that the charge brought against the proposed constitution of Ireland and sacred maxim, the free government of Warrington, guided by the clear annexed to that maxim nor by the sense in which it was hitherto been understood. This interesting subject will be resumed. So that was 47. A couple days late, that is 47 of the Federalist Papers. It was also by Madison. So Madison wrote credit. So there we go. So I hope you enjoyed that reading, and I'll be back for more readings later.